Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to our fourth Endeavors Colloquium this semester. And it's a glorious day for several reasons, not least of which being that we're around the bend with the election. And it's really great to come together and think about the meaning and power of art to guide us through moments like these. I'm Jacqueline Goldsby. I'm chair of African American Studies here at Yale. And I want to point out that we have two more sessions to present in this series of discussions we've been holding all semester. Next Thursday on November 19th, which is a Thursday, right? Not this is a special day, but on Thursday, November 19th at 11:45 to 1:15, one of our newest faculty members in African American Studies, Professor Philip Goff, will detail the groundbreaking work he's been doing directing the Center for Policing Equity. And there's a way in which the center's work is kind of aptly summed up in one of its mottos, doing data science for racial justice. And Professor Goff will unpack what that phrase, that idea means, and how his team has put that principle into scholarly action and political activism around the politics of policing. So that will be next Thursday. And then on December 10th, I believe it is, yes, another Thursday from 11:45 to 1:15, another new colleague, Professor Elizabeth Hinton, a wonderful, brilliant historian, will team up with a longtime ally of African American Studies, Professor Tracy Mears of the law school. And they're going to map out the work that's happening at the Justice Collaboratory, which is a research and policy action center organized by law school faculty. So those are the next two events, and we hope to see all of you there. The department chose to dedicate the semester's colloquium series to issues that would be decisive to the outcome of the presidential election and beyond, because we know our work is not done, even though the election went in the direction I hope most of us want it to go. But just a review for those of you who haven't been with us these past weeks, the challenges of securing voting rights and theorizing new models of citizenship, which we got to do with Latasha Brown, who co-founded Black Voters Matter, is tremendously still alive with us as an issue. The delivery of justice advancing healthcare to the formerly incarcerated, their families and communities, was an amazing discussion that we held with Emily Wang, who directs the Center for Health and Justice out of the Yale School of Medicine. And today, again, we're going to be thinking about the enduring and evolving role of art in making social justice thinkable and actionable with our extraordinary panel, who you'll meet in just a minute. I want to thank our co-sponsor, the Center for the Study of Race, Indigeneity, and Transnational Migration, who's been co-sponsoring these events with us, and the director of RITM, Professor Steve Pitty, and its associate director, Matthew Tanico, have been extraordinary colleagues with us to make all of this come together. I want to thank them. I also want to thank our staff, Vanessa Epps, who's been incredibly diligent of just stepping into the work of publicizing and getting these Zoom links out for all of us to congregate here together. I want to thank her for that work. And Emmanuel Bissell, who's here with us today, managing the Zoom room to make sure that all the connections work the way they should. I want to thank them both for their support of this initiative. And now I want to turn it over to my colleague, Professor Crystal Feemster, who's done a brilliant job organizing the series, and she'll introduce today's panel.
Thank you, Jackie. And I also want to add my gratitude to both Vanessa and Emmanuel for all their support in making this happen and working with me and just making sure everything runs smoothly, and for particularly Vanessa, I haven't said this, but helping to design the beautiful flyers that we have for this series. Vanessa put a lot of work into that, and I think they're really beautiful. So I want to just give her a shout out for her work on that front. But I also want to thank all of you for being here today. I know, myself and many others, we're tired, but I think there is joy and much to celebrate. And I know that I've been inspired in the last couple of days in ways that I haven't been able to find inspiration in a while. And I think that, part of our celebration, I feel like this work, these artists that are with us today, are going to inspire us with not just their words and their art, but with their presence, and remind us that the ways in which we can find beauty and joy in the struggle. So I am so grateful that they're going to be with us today and holding this space for us. So before I introduce them, I want to remind folks about the format. We will allow our participants to engage in a robust and full conversation for about 45 minutes. Around 4 o'clock, I will sort of give them the nod to go ahead and start opening up for questions. We take the questions in the chat. Ideally, we would love for you to send those questions, comments to Claudia Rankin in the private chat, and she will sort through the questions and really present them to our two gifted artists, scholars, intellectuals, to respond to. So I'll ask that you do that, and make sure you keep your mics on mute throughout the conversation. And on that note, I have the great honor of introducing three wonderful scholars and artists. I want to begin with my colleague, Claudia Rankin. She is the author of 5 books of poetry, including Citizen, An American Lyric, and Don't Let Me Be Lonely. 3 plays, including Help and The White Card. Her recent collection of essays was just published by Grey Wolf Press in 2020, titled Just Us, An American Conversation. And in 2016, Rankin co-founded the Racial Imaginary Institute. And among her numerous awards and honors, Rankin is the recipient of the Bobbitt National Prize for Poetry, the Poets and Writers Jackson Poetry Prize, and the fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, and the National Endowment of the Arts, to just name a few. And we're really lucky and honored to have her leading this conversation today. We also have Reginald Dwayne Betts, one of a friend and a colleague and a co-parent in this community that we call New Haven. So it's a real treat to have him in AFAM in conversation with us today. He's a renowned and published poet, speaker, and leader in public defense and advocacy. Betts is the recipient of numerous awards, including the 2018 Guggenheim Fellowship and the New American Fellowship. Betts' writing has been featured in the New York Times, the New Yorker, and the Washington Post. Betts is currently leading the Million Book Project with my colleague, Elizabeth Hinton, and colleagues over in the law school under Tracy Mears' leadership over there. And that initiative, which aims to transform the role of literature and libraries in the lives of people in prison, is in the making. They're doing that work now. And finally, I want to introduce Titus Kaphar, also a friend and a member of this New Haven community that we're really lucky to have him here. He's an artist whose paintings, sculptures, and installations examine the history of representation by transforming its styles and mediums with formal innovations to emphasize the physicality and the dimensionality of the canvas and materials themselves. Kaphar received an MFA from the Yale School of Art and is a distinguished recipient of numerous prizes and awards, including a 2014 Gwendolyn Knight and Jacob Lawrence Fellowship and a 2018 Art for Justice Fund grant and the 2018 Rappaport Prize. Kaphar's painting Analogous Colors 2020 was featured on the cover of the June 15, 2020 issue of Time magazine, which included a report on the protests sparked by George Floyd's killing at the hands of Minneapolis police. Kaphar's work is included in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art, of course, the Yale University Art Gallery, among many others. Kaphar has 2 forthcoming exhibits, and one of them actually might be open now in New York, but he can talk about that, and in Belgium. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Dwayne, who is going to share some images with us so we can all be on the same page.
Cool. Yeah. How's everybody doing? Oh, this is Zoom. Y'all can't even talk back to me, huh?
They
All right.
can.
I'm gonna share my screen and then we'll walk you through a few images and then we will start the conversation. Thank everybody for coming though. So what you see here is I'm just gonna walk through some of the pieces that were in the Pleading Freedom exhibit. So this is one of Titus's pieces, and really I'm just going to show you the images. I'm not going to try to explain it or talk about them. I'm just going to run through them. And those are the pieces.
Thanks, Dwayne. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I was up on the rock today. It's a beautiful day, so it's nice to spend the afternoon with you. I bring up being on the rock because I went on a walk the other day and I was telling someone that I was walking with that I was going to talk to Dwayne and Titus today. And they said, oh, Dwayne and Titus, they met at St. Thomas. I don't even know if this is true, but the story I got was that because their children went to the same school, they became friends. Is this at all true, either of you? No?
I can't see Titus, but no, it's not true.
It's not true? Okay.
It's okay though. I mean, everybody has to have a mythology created about them, so we could just say that.
It's how I met them.
It's how you met them. Well, I like that story because I like the fact that that it was the generations that your kids were bringing together, you two great guys and amazing artists in the world. So, but okay, it's not true. So there it goes. But I'm gonna have to go back to that person and ask them where they got that from. The Pleading Freedoms exhibit, which is the sort of catalyst for this talk, is a talk that I thought we could rename this discussion in this way, that our conversation is going to be about erasures, redactions, and other critical creative collaborations and endeavors by the both of you. And so I wanted to begin by thinking about erasure. You know, there are many ways to enter into that, and it's been a very sort of hot topic because we've had in circulation a lot of videos around Black death and Black suffering. And so I was really interested in beginning with the consideration of how each of you sort of walk the line between artists and activists, or writer and activist, relative to the creation of work. And then the second part of that question would be, how does the act of engaging either erasure or redactor from archival materials play into the practice?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I wonder about the first piece you had on the Times Magazine cover, Titus, because I sort of feel like, at least for me, it was a bit of reluctance actually to try to make my art immediately reflect in the moment, to try to speak to the immediate moment, the concerns that were on my mind as a citizen in this country. And I remember actually, you had Eric Garner, you had Michael Brown, and you just had this wave, and I'll just speak to the two specific poems and how they came about, and they came about as first that it was I was resisting trying to be the poet that writes about the thing that's happening right now, because in some ways you end up getting a slogan instead of a poem. And I was writing Bastards of the Reagan era, and my full intent was to try to engage with this question of violence and how violence was working within our country and within our communities, and specifically within the world of incarceration that I understood, and my friends. And and I just remember driving to Rutgers for a talk, and when I came back, I think somebody got acquitted on the way back, and we got word of acquittal or something. And it was just in that moment that I ended up just having to change one of the poems that I had written. I had to rethink it, and really seriously take into consideration what it was that I was trying to say. And I know I had one line in it, um, it sort of framed the conversation, but I know I had one line in it, and somebody's throwing a trash can through Sal's window, calling that revolution, while the bodies still roll off the blocks and into the prisons and into the graveyards. And so for me, the whole process was an act of like a reluctance until so much of resisting the moment forced me into the moment and allowed me, I think, to get into the moment in a different way. And the Tamir Rice poem that I wrote was the same. It was sort of like, I'm not writing a poem about this. I'm not going to write a poem about the police murder in Tamir Rice until I told a friend to write a poem about something they would never read in public. And at the law school, they got this wall where everybody could talk. And like I had wrote this poem, and I was so mad at the discussions that were going on around what was happening. And I had wrote the poem a few weeks ago, and I was never going to show anybody. And then I just posted it to the entire law school as if that's how you publish a poem. And I thought, that is how you publish a poem. When you write a piece and you want the community where you live to hear everything that you got to say. And the poem was kind of raw. Actually, I hadn't even really worked on it too much. It was just there. And it was the same thing, though. How do you, and in fact, I wrote that to speak about St. T's. I was really thinking about what it meant to drive my kids to school, in a really privileged school, in a really privileged place. And I was thinking about how we got far too many Black folks who own a kind of suffering and fear that their lives don't embody. And I felt it was something grotesque about it. I still think it's something grotesque about that. And it's like, how do I work my way through these issues while acknowledging that it is a fair amount of privilege that I carry every day into the world? And so part of that poem was me trying to confront that and trying to say, despite the privilege, I'm still a Black man driving his two children, his two Black sons to school, and the murder of a 12-year-old. It was playing on repeat in my head. And so anyway, these poems for me come out of a reluctance, and I'm not really an activist in any kind of way. I try to get people I know out of prison. I've decided that I just need to simplify my own terms. And so I'm in no way an activist, really. I just try to get people I know out of prison.
Okay, Titus, before you go answer the question, I just want to follow up with Dwayne on one thing. Dwayne, you have written so much about your own life as somebody who, your last book is called Felon. So in some ways, aren't you turning yourself into a metaphor of the system of mass incarceration, so that the subject of your work becomes not, it's both personal and public at the same time, and as personal as you get. I mean, I just, the piece about in the Times where you bring up your mother's story as well as a rape victim, it seems to me that this idea that you're reluctant to move into the realm um, of the devastated and victimized Black person within our society might be useful for you in the creation of things, but is not necessarily true in terms of where you're going, in terms of your subject.
It depends, because it took me 10 years to write that piece that I just published in the Times. I mean, a literal and 10 years and really you could say 15 in terms of knowing my mother's experience and then even beginning to write about it. And if you go through the through line of my work, you'll find me dealing with sexual assault a lot, and you'll find me dealing with domestic violence a lot. But that's me taking half steps to the thing that I wanted or needed to say. So I would argue that it's like yes and no. I would argue that and even in the poems, I write in first person a lot, but part of it is I believe that I need to figure out a way how to situate all of it in the lyric eye, because I think anything else ends up being me unwilling to embrace some of the hardest things I write about. So that when it's somebody that's inflicting pain, it's always somebody else that's doing it. It's not me. So even when you read Felon, it is a fair amount of it that's me, but it's also a fair amount of it that's written in the first person that's not me. And most of those poems, I mean, I hope they feel fresh and I hope they feel immediate. But I mean, a lot of that work is taken like years to get to, and some of it is not about me at all. And so, but what you said that I wholeheartedly agree with is the point is the juxtaposition of the public and private to create something that I feel is like fully political. But I feel like that work, I try to honor the work that activists do and just sort of like acknowledge that that's not what it is that I do. And frequently, I'm just lucky that my work is like this conversation about Harris and sexual assault, and also getting friends out of prison. Like fundamentally, that piece is talking about two people who I can name, and I could pull up a screen share parole package that I'm working on to get them out of prison, right? Like that work feels like it's at a moment right now, but I've been working on those cases for 5-6 years. I mean, I've been working on trying to get them out of prison before Virginia brought parole back. And so it's a way in which you could read it and think, oh man, Dwayne's on point. He is right in the moment. And the truth is, nah, I'm just lost in the moment that I got lost in, when I carjacked somebody on December 7th, 1996.
Okay, thank you. What about you, Titus? How do you walk the line between being an artist and an activist, since your work speaks directly, as timeless as the pieces are? They're still historical. They're still critiquing. They're still engaged in many of the vibrant questions we have now.
So I think one of the things that Dwayne is getting at is, and one of the things that I think we're eventually going to get at is just this idea that the political is personal and the personal is political. I think eventually we're going to come around to that somehow. The piece that Dwayne referred to, the first painting that was in time was, it was editorialized as something that was very much about Ferguson, but Ferguson was a secondary. It's the B-roll to the A-roll in terms of what the painting is about. The painting is about me getting stopped by the police with my brother. That's what the painting's about. The painting's about my personal experience being in Chelsea. I've shared this a lot, where the police officers stopped me and my brother while we were walking down the street and put us up against the wall, put guns on us, and accused me of stealing art out of my own show, right? And so it's personal. And I think for me, that's the hard part. Like what you were saying before, Dwayne, is like, when at that point in my practice, that was the point in my practice where my work was no longer private. Because up until then, I'm just a dude in the studio making stuff that nobody really cares about anyway. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on in my head. And then that work came into the world, and all of a sudden I found myself being public in a way that anybody who knows me knows that I'm not like super comfortable with. And so I think what Dwayne may be resisting is this idea of us as activist symbols. There's a whole like symbolism that goes along with that idea that I'm in no way interested in. I'm interested in the work. I'm interested in justice. I'm interested in understanding my role in the world. But I read too much history and seen too much history to know that to be comfortable with the way in which people want to put you on some kind of a different pedestal as an activist, just to wait for you to slip up and fall down, and then like have some overjoyed expression when you fall. Yeah. The other thing I want to say is like, no, that story is not true about how when I met. But, and I know Jason Stanley's on the line, who always wants to take credit for us meeting each other. But I'm not gonna let you do that. But what I will say about that story is our friendship is rooted in our fatherhood. I think that that is Dwayne and I, like our connection is deeper because we are both Black fathers trying to figure out how to raise our kids. And we are raising our kids in realities so different from the reality that we grew up in. Our kids have no understanding of the struggles that we went through when we were their age. And in some ways, we don't necessarily want them to fully understand that. They shouldn't have to go through that. But I think that that's a fundamental part of our relationship. We talk a lot about being dads and what that means. So even though we didn't meet at St. Thomas in that way, both of our kids go to St. Thomas. And so it has become a very important part of our relationship.
Thank you for that. I also want to pick up on this reluctance around the naming of the work as in any way activist, because I wonder, and I wonder this from my own personal position, there has been a tendency to name work that is done by Black people as political work. And that has been out there as a way to denigrate the work in an odd way. Both is flattering and saying that, oh, you're involved in what's going on, you're on the cutting edge of politics in America. But on the other way, it's a way of saying it's not white work, it's not transcendent work, it's not work that is able to really address the human condition and how all of us are one thing and blah, 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 as if there is a lack of investment in whiteness in the work of white people. And
Yeah.
so often I see artists who are of color running away from that way of talking about their work. And I wonder how much think about or fear the idea that people will use it as a reductive measure around your work, whether it's the writing or the paintings.
Yeah, I think the first I just reread Please Don't Let Me Be Lonely a few months ago, right? And I'm like, yeah, why do I keep adding please?
If you put please, it's a song.
Well, it is a song, but maybe
you read that book and
yeah. Oh, and what I was thinking is Sean Bell, Amadou Diallo. I mean, the work is laced with that, and it's beautiful work, and it's not work of a time, it's work of time. You go back to it, and it keeps delivering a richness. And so, if somebody pick up Citizen, they like, yeah, this poet Claudia Rankin is really political, and I'm like, but Claudia Rankin always been Claudia Rankin, and it's just, how do you approach the breadth and the length of the work? And I think it becomes reductive both ways. I tend to not care what white people think about my work. Like that's not even what I'm concerned about how people are reductive in that manner. I'm concerned about the people who I know who think that my Kamala Harris piece was supposed to say what they wanted it to say. Who feel like, oh yeah, I've read your piece, and what I just don't understand is you don't know that Kamala Harris is a cop. Who want slogans from me, and that's why I've resisted. I've resisted because, yeah, man, look, I shouldn't even tell this story. I'm gonna tell it.
Wait, hold on. Go ahead, because you're gonna do it.
I get invited to this gig here at Yale. I'm some such and such, right? and I'm having lunch with the folks, and they say, first story is like, it was so brave of you in your book to admit that you sexually assaulted somebody. I was like, oh shit, what book, huh? And I knew the poem they were talking about. And when I wrote the poem, the people who published the poem the first time is A Crown of Sonnets that Ends Felon. They called me and they were like, do you know in this book you admit to raping somebody? And I was like, I'm absolutely certain that I didn't admit to doing that because I've never done that. And I could have told him I'm absolutely certain that I didn't admit to doing that because I feel like that's the worst thing on this planet you could do, given the experience of women in my family. But I didn't want to go that route, right? And I only say it now because I've written a piece and it's out there. But this person was trying to, they needed to connect to poetry, not to something that was deeper, not to something that was raising the same kind of questions or the right white artists that they teach in the classroom. They needed to connect it to me. And it was no reason for them to have that need to connect it to me. Like I don't read, I don't read Emily Dickinson and wonder if she did the things that she did in that work. I just don't read poetry that way. And I know that I've been constantly taught that you aren't supposed to read literature that way. But it's a strange thing in which the writing of like Black writers gets reduced wholly to the personal. And there's no imaginative force. This is what they tell you. I I wish I lived the kind of life you live so that I could write like you. You don't fucking wish you lived the life I lived. And you can live the life I lived and still can't write like me. But that is not what they say to Ashbury. I've never heard somebody say, Ashbury is just the profound suffering you've experienced allows you to be a great artist. Like that is not the way we approach white art. And I feel like it's not just like the white community or the white world or white critics who do that. I feel like unfortunately, there's many people who want you to be a jukebox
Mhm.
and they choose the songs that they want you to sing. And they don't read the work as expansively to allow permission for other things to exist within that work. Like they don't say, why does that poem have a speaker who says what that last poem says? Because that's not important. What's
Exactly.
important is how they could characterize me. And they were dead wrong, and I'm gonna start saying that every time I meet a white writer. I'm gonna take the most absurd thing that's been written in the book and say, I can't believe that you feel that way about your mother. You know what I mean? Like it's just an absurdity, things that I would never imagine doing that people do.
Well, first of all, you know what they said about Ashbury? They said, we don't know what the fuck you're writing about. They trashed his early books because they were so obscure. And part of the reason they were so obscure is because he was at Yale and he was gay and he couldn't admit and write from that positionality. So he had to create a kind of vague subjectivity that could move through those poems. But that's another day and another conversation. What about you, Titus?
I think it's interesting because there is difference because I'm making images, I'm making pictures. Words and pictures are very, very, very different. And so I make images which not requires, that's the wrong word, compels people to want words. And sometimes you are making images because you're trying to visualize something ineffable, something that doesn't have words. I explore all kinds of ideas, of course, but I do start from a place of like, where do I connect to the story? Whether it's like directly autobiographical is a different thing. But for me, it's like, how do I connect to this story? And that's something I think about a lot. The other thing is, right now, everybody wants to talk about Black artists having a moment. And it's funny to me, some Black artists that they're talking about having moments have been here for like 50 years, but they're now having a moment. I'm not really interested in I'm not interested in trying to make work. Let me put it this way. The revolution I'm fighting for is not one where everybody makes the same work as Kerry James Marshall. His work is amazing, but that sort of figurative work that speaks directly about the reality of Black life is not what I'm fighting for, or even people making the work that I make as I think about this in the context of Next Haven. What I'm interested in is like the freedom to make whatever you want to make. What you talked about, Claudia, was this idea that Black folks not being able to make something that feels universal. That's really what it comes down to. If Donald Judd can make a Black square and explore minimalism in that way, I think our folks should be able to do the exact same thing. And so I know that in my work is going to continue to evolve. And so I'm going to do all kinds of different things. But that is actually the freedom that I want, is just that ability to explore, whether it's abstraction, minimalism, figurative, whatever it may be.
Well, that brings me to the practice, and because I'm really interested in the pleading freedoms process. And Robert Rauschenberg, he erased de Kooning's drawings in 1953. And Jasper Johns referred to the idea of erasure as additive subtractions. And I really love that term, that in the erasure we saw in the initial images, and I guess I can see them behind you, Dwayne, that sense of going back into the archives and erasing in order to add, in order to extend the cultural readability of the document. So I'm wondering if you could speak to why both of you have gone in the direction of redactions and erasure, how you think about it when you are doing it, whether it's painting, whitewashing the painting, or using tar to cover the face, or to redact as you did in those pieces behind you.
Yeah, I was thinking about, first I was thinking about Percival Everett's great novel, Erasure. And, and one of the things that he does is, he creates this character that's writing a fictional novel. He's like a judge for a big award. And he's frustrated with the way in which people think about the awards to come through. So he quickly pens a fake novel about Black life. And what he does, I think, is erases all of the complexity out of Black life within that novel. And he expects it to flop. But then it ends up winning the prize that he's judging. And it ends up being like wildly successful, more so than anything he's ever written. And so I tend to think redaction beyond erasure, because I think about erasure as the way in which you could cripple the understanding of a subject by thinning it out to just its stereotype. And I think the law as a whole, when you take that whole legal document, I think so often the law as a whole does something to like frustrate our understanding of really complex issues with all of the words that get added. So I like the notion of subtraction and subdition, because I was trying to think of, sort of independent and related to the work that me and Titus were thinking about. Really, I was just trying to understand the law in such a way that I could convey it to my folks. And I thought, what if I redacted? What if I just argued that a lot of this stuff doesn't matter? And I wasn't trying to do this in a way to transform the text to say something else, but I was trying to do what Percival Everett did, but flip it. So instead of writing the novel that makes you aware of all of the disingenuous ways we view Black life, what if I got rid of all the legalese to make you aware of what's really at stake in these cases? And what was more troubling to me is how many pages I could get rid of. I would start with 70 pages and end up with 10. And I would start with 70 pages and end up with 8. But the beauty of it was, and part of this wasn't just me, it was the lawyers who wrote these briefs. They thought it was really important to find a way to bring to life the men and women who were suffered under the system of money bail, or really under the system of incarcerating people because they were too poor to pay. If I wanted to summarize it in a sentence, whether you're talking about traffic tickets or bail or minor fines and fees. And it's cool though, because as a lawyer, nobody understands the bandwidth for the stuff I do in my family, but they understand things like freedom. And I think these pieces allow me to sort of tell a story in such a way that that my folks will get it.
Thank you. Titus?
I was interested in redaction as mark making. one of the things that Dwayne and I talked about when we started working on this project is how do we collaborate on something that doesn't diminish either the image or the text. And so usually when you have collaborations with art and text, sometimes one of those things becomes the superior. And we wanted that not to happen. And so the redaction itself, the process had to be, it had to be brush marks, right? It had to be a part of the work itself, the painting itself. And so redaction just became the go-to language for us because it was a part of what I have been doing for a long time. Redaction was for me in the paintings. If you think about the painting behind me, it's a way of focusing my perspective, focusing my attention, giving myself the opportunity to move some other things in the composition to the side while I explore a quiet idea that hasn't really had the opportunity to have the volume turned up on it. So in some ways, redacting is the opportunity to turn the volume up on other parts of the composition.
So, Titus, if the collaboration caused you to wish to equalize image text inside these pieces, how is that different from when you're working on your own with the whitewashings or the cutouts?
I have to trust that the redaction, the sort of formalized redaction that is dependent on the content of the poem that Dwayne is making is still aesthetically functional. So what we found is it always was. It always was. It was never a problem. We were redacting things. So the process of making these pieces, Dwayne, can you possibly share your screen and share that the image of the two larger redaction pieces? So Dwayne takes the text and the legal document, and then he redacts it down.
But you got to say too, though, right? Because part of it is like, it don't work if you get a print and you have to read the next print to understand the content.
Right.
So I almost had to make it like a haiku, like it's a sequence, but each one has to stand alone. So if I was to read this one, when you get to $25 per day, cleaning the city, scrubbing feces and blood from jail floors. Like, that's a wrap. And we could go to the next thing, but that's a complete idea in itself, because again, it has to be some kind of literal integrity with the words on the page and the actual page itself.
Yeah. But in each of these pieces, each piece is actually 4 pieces. So there's a portrait that I etch onto the panel and then print. Then a second portrait that etched and print. Then we silk screen the text, and then we silk screen the redaction. And so we're seeing each layer of this individual piece come together. And after looking at it again and again, what we realized was the deconstruction was interesting in itself. So we started doing these pieces where we were showing the individual layers because it helped you understand. How the work functions when they're all together. We tried initially doing some redactions where it was more a digital redaction, and we realized very quickly that the hand was necessary. And so Dwayne redacted each one of these lines by hand. It's subtle, but it makes a huge difference that those lines are not precise, that they are handmade. They angle slightly, they wave, they undulate. That's all really important. So again, it allows the viewer, it allows me as a first viewer to move back and forth between the faces and the redaction as marks and the text all sort of in balance with one another.
I also like the fact that from the get-go, it suggests a kind of partial justice, that the act of redaction means that we're never bringing the full force of the text to the plaintiff or to the moment in a way. but I understand also that there were other ways of thinking about it. Do either of you think about counter narratives as a strategy for the work? That Dwayne, you said you don't care what white people think, or it's not a frame you're working against, but are you thinking, as it's 2020, we're making work, all of us, and this is also true, I think, for those people who are doing academic work, or that there's a way in which a thing has been told, a story has been told, a picture has been set, and then there's another way to do it. And I feel like the choices that both of you are making are actually critically engaged to disrupt and prevent certain kinds of readings that heretofore determined the narratives around certain subjects.
Yeah, well, I mean, well, maybe I think a more correct way I could have put my statement is that I care what everybody thinks, but I'm not concerned with trying to perform for a particular audience at a particular time.
Right.
And so it's almost as if, the first poem I mentioned, um, House of Unending, it's almost as if that poem, which has some moments that can be read as literally about me, but also has moments that can be obviously read as not about me, is almost as if that poem sets up a narrative that that then I can engage and get at with the Kamala Harris piece. Even though when I write House of Unending, I'm not even thinking about the Kamala Harris piece. So yeah, maybe that's true, but I just don't think that. First of all, I think as a poet, the one beauty of poetry is that any collection is filled with narratives and counter narratives. But I think the other beauty of the poem is that, unlike memoir, is that I could like bring my imagination to explore and explode the sort of tension between a narrative and a counter narrative. And to be quite frank, often I'm not certain where I'm positioned within that conversation. And I kind of think, and this is the difference between me being an artist and me being an activist, is when I'm representing somebody on parole, you know, you got 2 murders and we're going to work to get you out of prison. And this is how we going to tell this story. And this is who you are. And yeah, I'm honest about it. I think that they are, I believe in them. But if I didn't believe in them, my narrative is set. And I think as an artist, you know, my intentions don't have to drive what people take from the work. It's a certain kind of freedom in which I could do my thing and let it live in a world in a way um, that's not solely driven by what I want a audience's response to be. And that's quite unlike, I think, the work I do when I represent people on parole. And I think that's like closer to activism than my art. Because when I represent you, I know what we want the outcome to be. And I know when I failed. Only time I fail as an artist, it's like when my son was like, yeah, you can't say that. I'm like, huh? He was like, yeah, that line right there where you called yourself a felon, I don't like that. I don't think that's true. Like that's when I fail as an artist because somebody who I wasn't even thinking about as my audience has like cut into my thinking in a way that makes me feel like, yeah, I could have thought better. And that's the failure of an artist, I think, or at least that's my failure of an artist, when I find that like I could have thought better in my art and I didn't. Although I kept my line because I ain't gonna let no 9-year-old edit me. I'm just not with that.
I want to throw this in there too. I want to get to the counter narrative in a second, but this is something that Dwayne and I think about a lot. We're working on this other project together, this film project. And a couple of weeks ago, Dwayne was in the New York Times for a piece that he did, and I was in the New York Times for a piece that we did. And those pieces were reviewed by different people, but who doesn't get to review our work generally? Our work generally is not reviewed by our mothers. And the people that they sort of represent. And so what we did was we actually had our mothers interview each other, right? That's that to me, my mother's thought on my work is sort of symbolic of like my community's thought on my work in that way. That's something that I think about. Like, you know, I think way more about what you and Dwayne think about my work than I think about what the New York Times or whoever's reviewing my work thinks about my work. I'm fine with them hating everything I do. I'm not fine with y'all hating everything I do because you know my intentions, right? You know me. You know what I'm trying to get at in this thing. And so if I fail on that stage, that's a whole different kind of calculus. So I am looking at the counter narrative. That is something that I'm interested in, but I'm interested in it in the context of me as the first audience. How do I want to see it? And that evolved in me because I had to learn in graduate school that the professors critiqued what I was doing quite a bit. That's the nature of the MFA program at Yale. And I didn't have a whole lot of allies when I started cutting holes in paintings. I didn't have a whole lot of allies when I started watching paintings. Those same professors now are very interested in what I'm doing, but at the time, that's not it. So I had to figure out whether I wanted it or not, whether it felt right to me or not, knowing that they may never get it, right? And so that's when I'm saying, like, when I sort of push back on being a sort of activist, that's kind of where some of that comes from, because I feel like it's necessary for me to prioritize my conception of the piece, my understanding of the piece before it goes off into the world.
But you know what's crazy though, and I should admit this, is I did a whole lot of work too, saying artists should work more with activist organizations and nonprofit organizations, and did some work raising money and trying to build those connections between those organizations and artists. But my point wasn't to turn the artist into an activist. My point was to acknowledge that we all live in this community, and that I do think that the work of activists and the work of government officials would just be much better if it was more deeply engaged with art. And I do believe that you could do that without becoming, you know, propaganda for a machine. And I think that some places across the country have begun to think about that. But you know, it's interesting. I mean, you talk to public defenders and they be like, a lesson before dying. Who is that? And it's like, oh, how do we really do this work, and how do we really feel a deep connection to the people who deeply do this work when they literally sometimes will only support things that you do and say that follows the company line that they want to push. You know, I got friends who were like, you know, we were colleagues, we worked together, and I saw their response to my Times piece, and I was like, all right, we aren't actually friends, we aren't actually colleagues. What you wanted was like you wanted a puppet. And because I wouldn't ferret back the things that you were whispering in my ear, you don't want to support the piece. You're not retweeting it to your audience. You're not engaging with it. And I get it. I'm not mad. But now I recognize that you're part of the problem, because soon as my community's justice is not in your interest, then my community's justice won't be on your agenda. And I think that's one of the things that I resist. Although I work really hard to get people to care.
Let me add one piece to that. This political conversation, like just recognizing that, you know, it's all going to be political in some way, and that I think that part of the reason why I also push back on this idea of being a political artist is because I don't want the work to not be understood formally as well. You are a great poet, not simply because of what you talk about, but the way you talk about what you talk about, how you do it, the formal structures that you manipulate and use and change and alter, the rules that you use and the rules that you break. When we talk about political art, the formal part of the art goes out of the conversation. It's like, no, you didn't spend 20 years learning your craft and trying to figure this out and creating a language that's functional for you. What it becomes is like a conversation about the politics. And I know, I mean, going back to what Dwayne said about like first person, writing in first person, I know that there are some times where like you'll look at a piece and you'll go, this is an amazing piece. I'm not sure if it fits the politics, but this is an amazing piece. And this is something we struggle with when we look at art history itself. There are plenty of pieces that we look at and we go, politically, this is off. this is really off. And at the same time, I'm struggling because I recognize that that is masterfully executed. So I think for me, I want to live in that tension. I want there to be this difficult place. I don't want to just hold on to one, yes, Titus Kaphar, political artist, or no, Titus Kaphar, completely formalist. I want to live in some place in the middle.
That is a great place to open up the discussion. We are at 4 o'clock and I see no questions in my chat. Perhaps there's a private chat, Crystal, that I'm supposed to go to, but in the chat function, there are no questions.
Now, the people haven't put in their questions, but this is the moment for them to start. They can send a question to you in the private chat. That would be great. But they'll start doing that now.
While we wait for that to happen, maybe I can ask this one last question. Because by talking about you, both of you as artists, important artists, contemporary artists who engage issues of our time, it's not really an attempt to call you political artists. It's a way of saying it's what is great about the work is that it does not shy away from the realities of our time. And those realities engage many of the political hot topics of now. So it's just part of what the entire picture of the life's work is. So but I understand that we're constantly in that fight not to have that word political engagement reduce the work and its achievements and its excellence and craft and all of that.
But I would no doubt in a minute be the like poet in residence at the national at for Cheryl Eiffel. Like I would like no doubt be like if Brian Stevenson was like, look, man, we need a suite of poems like Robert Hayden did when he did that suite of 7 poems called Burning Spear. Man, I'm hip to that, and I want to commission you to do something like that. So I guess what I mean is it's a kind of superficial engagement with the work. I haven't been writing the same poem since 1996, but I've had the same obsession since 1996 because when they take a 16-year-old and put them in solitary confinement for 10 days without giving them a bath, it tends to stay on your mind for a long time. So I've had the same political obsessions because when you know men who got sentenced to life at 15, and they stay your friends when you're 40, those become your obsessions. But I think one of the things I just want to make clear about is I'm not interested in a reductive characterization of my work. If we want to have a real back and forth about what it means to connect the things that I write to the struggle to end the over incarceration of people in this country. If we want to connect the things that I write to achieving social justice among multiple spectrums, right? That I'm really deeply invested in that. But what happens, I think, is a lot of times people just want a superficial engagement. You could turn on the news and you will not. I won't turn on the news and see Claudia Rankin in the middle of the discussion about addressing, like even something as basic as microaggressions. And people will like name drop your book and they will be like, and you will say, well, we're having this conversation about Michael Brown. We've been talking about this for a long time, for decades. And my work wasn't in the center of that conversation because the people who were doing social justice work chose not to have it in the center of conversation, or maybe not the people doing social justice work, but just our inclination as a country. And so I guess what I mean is I don't want to be I like stepchildren, so I don't want to use that metaphor. I don't want to be like the handmaiden, but if you say handmaiden, that sounds really scary right now. I don't want to be that off thing, I want to be an integral part of the actual work that's going on in a way that I feel like, Grapes of Wrath was, in a way that I feel like, other texts in the past, like really existed as like a fundamental part of the work that was being, and maybe I'm just being idealist and maybe they felt the same way I feel, but I sort of just feel like, I feel like I'm not, you know, I feel like I'm always embarrassed about how little, you know, lawyers I know about your work was the first work that somebody was like, yo, Dwayne, have you read this book, Citizen? And I'm laughing. I'm like, all right, I'm glad you're reading Citizen. But what made it profound was that was like the first time that people in law school was carrying around poetry books. You know, was thinking about literature, was thinking about, and so in Titus's work is one of the first times folks is like, yeah, man, this guy, you know, poets that we know is like, you know, this guy Titus Kaphar, and it's being a part of the landscape of the conversation. But I guess I just want not to be an afterthought. And so that's why I want to claim
I'll
that.
tell you the story and then move to the question. I was in Wyoming getting on one of those little planes that, you know, terrify everybody. And this guy said to me, he's a poet, so it's not totally out of the blue, but he said to me, have you heard of this guy, Dwayne Betts? And this was before, this was like, I think even before your first book came out. So I think you shouldn't underestimate the power of poetry out in the world.
Dude sounds like a genius, though. He
Um,
sounds like an exceptional human being.
he is. Jenny Tang wants to know, I wanted to ask about their investments, both of you, in portraiture and relation of portraits to history and subjecthood and subjectivity. And so I guess it's both about, you know, the use of the first person. That would be another way of thinking about it. But you want to start, Titus?
Yeah. My favorite historical work is portraiture. Like I go to it first when I'm at the museum. But you end up seeing, at least I end up seeing people who don't really look like me. And we're all arrogant to some degree. And we're all looking for ourselves in images. And I wanted to understand how to paint my skin. And so usually as an artist, what they tell you is to go to the masters, right? And that's how you're supposed to learn, is to go to the masters. But I recognize that the masters hadn't explored what I was trying to explore. And that the occasions where there were, quote, portraits of Black people, there were more caricatures than there were portraits. You know, if you were painting someone you loved, you wouldn't paint them like that. That was my experience of looking at portraits in the museum. And so I spend a lot of time still thinking about the representation of people, not as a traditional portrait. I mean, I have one behind me, which is a character study, which is the big version of the small one that's in your spot, Claudia, actually. I also make portraiture where you don't see the face at all, where you may just see the silhouette, and it's a way of addressing what wasn't there, what you didn't see, but it's still acknowledging that there was a Black presence, even though I don't have the features to be able to articulate that. There are no existing or historical records or details about those individuals, and therefore there's no way for me to like put that down on canvas. And so sometimes what that looks like is just a completely tarred out face, or a silhouette of an individual that stands in for someone I wish I did know.
You know, I'm just going to add, you know, Sarah Lewis's work around Frederick Douglass and how he was the most photographed man of the 19th century, and that his intention really was to put images of Black people, men out there using his own image, you know, but just to proliferate, just do it, so that when you close your eyes and you think, what does a Black guy look like? It turns out he looks like Frederick Douglass. And so, so in a way, that impulse to shift away from those images of daguerreotypes of enslaved people into a different image becomes, you know, the ones you see walking in the street, in fact, becomes so I'm going to do the next question And then Dwayne, you can take that, and then we'll just switch back and forth so we can cover as many questions as possible. This one, so Sarah, I'm going to skip your question and go to Jason's. There are several what seem to me problematic dichotomies here. On the one hand, Mr. Betts draws a dichotomy between the personal and the political, and the personal can be very political. But I want to ask Mr. Kaphar about a dichotomy he drew, which also seems to me to be real, but also misleading, between the formal properties of art and its excellence as political. One of the ways in which Mr. Kaphar's work is outstanding is that the political message is not didactic and overbearing. It seems to me that here it's not just that the formal excellence, it's not just about the formal excellence. Oh, it's going off the screen. Plus an important political message. The fact that his art is not didactically political has something to do with an aesthetic properties over and above the formal work. Political excellence in arts is not just having a good message. I'm wondering if he would speak to this aspect of the work, how the aesthetics and the political combine to make a political message, not didactic. So Dwayne, if you started with thinking a little bit about the personal and political again, and then we move to Titus's separation of those two things as well.
Yeah, but I think even the separation counts for my work. I mean, you know, you read my poems, you got blank verse, you have guzzles, you have sestinas, you have canzones, you have a crown of sonnets. I mean, you got a lot of formal attention to like, I mean, arguably I'm like a legit formalist, you know what I mean? I'm like, arguably, you know, one might say that I favor form more than that. I think though, thinking about the personal and the political and I think about the way that the art is perceived, I guess one of the distinctions I'm just trying to draw is between, like, I frequently just don't know what I'm going to say when I go to the page. And I'm just trying to draw that distinction. You know, I write even the Kamala Harris piece. I don't know what I'm going to say when I go to the page. And the process of producing art is to one rely on some of the formal skills I have to push me to a truth that I didn't have when I started. And I think too, to try to reveal something about the thing that I'm writing about that astonishes me. So I guess my I don't know if the dichotomy is a real dichotomy or not, except I'm trying to distinguish between, I think, like gossip and gospel. And I think gossip is what you trade with friends on street corners. And gospel is when you hear a story from a friend on the street corner and you have to say it again and you have to say it again. And the meaning for saying it is because you think it just makes the world feel a bit better by having told that story again. You know, and I like to believe that the poetry I write does that, but I also like to believe that it does that because I don't know what I'm gonna say going in.
Well,
You know,
I think what you're saying that is incredibly important, and as a fellow poet, I totally agree with this, is that the creation of art really doesn't have intention in it. And that's what makes it creation, that the act of creation is happening in the making of the thing. And
Yeah.
and intention has to do with having an agenda, which is how we think about political action and acting on that agenda towards that agenda. That's why they say, you know, like, my agenda here is women's choice, and then they go and do the many different ways, you know, approach that issue in those different ways. What about you, Titus? What are you thinking about?
I think the
Excellence.
reason the person sees the dichotomy is because that's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that I'm trying to do both. I'm trying to exist in both. And as soon as you look at something of mine and you think of it as a political piece, stop doing that and think of it as a formal piece. Then stop doing that and then think of it as a political piece. Like, I wanna be bouncing back and forth between this. I don't want you to feel comfortable calling me a political artist, and I don't want you to feel comfortable calling me a formal artist. I want you to exist in both of those spaces. And like, you know, it's difficult for us to hold these two different ideas in our hands at the same time, but I'm asking you to do that because that's the way I approach work. And it does have to do with this idea of process, that if I'm in the studio and I'm making a painting, but in this painting, what I politically believe is not highlighted, but formally the thing is blowing my mind, the painting's done. And so I have to wrestle in myself with what to do with this other sort of political stuff that's like not working. But I have to sit with it, right? Because what I've learned from my process is what Dwayne is saying, half the time I don't know. I just don't. The first time I balled up a painting, I had no idea what I was doing. No clue at all. It made no sense to me. I just knew I had to do it, period. And then I balled up the painting and looked at it and went, I don't know what the fuck this is. Like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing with this. And then I came back a week later and saw the same thing and went, oh my God, there it is, right? So I cannot be the kind of artist that puts arbitrary restrictions on my creative process in order to fit some political agenda, because I would diminish myself as the creator that I'm attempting to be. I'm still who I am. I still, you know, the personal is political, as we talked about before. I still hold the like spiritual ideas that I hold. I still believe the political things that I believe, and that is going to find its way into the work. And I trust that. I trust that. And to the degree that there is like internal conflict in the work, I believe that that's a valuable thing. Like we are conflicted people. And if my work doesn't reflect some kind of internal conflict, then I'm not reflecting myself.
So then in a way, and I agree with this, the word artist is a verb. And it is constantly in flux. And, you know, I don't really have the same thing about political work, because I feel like there's no way to pull out the politics from the reality or from the life. You just cannot. It's like saying I can put it on at 5 o'clock and take it off at 3 o'clock. I cannot, especially not as a Black woman. I cannot. And so there's no way for me to go to the page and work without all of that being in the flux of the creative process of the activity of the verbness of the word artist, you know? So that, I would say that.
So I wonder if there's a parallel in the visual art world and the poetry world. I don't know. But my experience at Yale was zero conversation about the political aspect of what I was doing. Zero conversation about the social implications of what I was doing. And then once in a while, someone from another department would come in and try to have a conversation about that in our critiques. And it would be very clear that the room was not prepared for that conversation. But so what ends up happening is there is and I'm not saying that this is good, by the way. I'm just
no.
There is a way in which visual arts people will purely review the thing based on its like formal aspects and the conversation it's having. Oh, you know, this is a conversation with abstract expressionism, and you're thinking about de Kooning, and you're thinking about, you know, all of these things that we can have a very, very long conversation about that, and not one time talk about the Black character there. Or we can have the opposite conversation where we only talk about the fact that there's a Black character there, and we don't talk about the fact that, yes, in fact, I am in conversation with de Kooning. I am having a conversation about abstract expressionism. And
Poets do that all the time.
Pardon me?
Poets do that all the time. You could.
But I think what we're talking about, I think when you say that, when you talk about the world, the historian, the art historians, the world of critique, we're talking about standards put in place by white people who have decided that as much as a work looks like their work, that's how good it, and that's how excellence is maintained and created. And so to have to refer to Black people as a political force or as a human being, that's a whole nother. So you can't really, there's a great essay which might be of interest to both of you by Denise Morel. She talks about Manet's Olympia and how all of the critical work done up until now gave a sentence to the Black woman in the painting. It said, the Black woman in the painting and the cat have no significance. But and then she went back and looked at Manet's archives. He painted 3 paintings of that Black woman. He was interested in her role in Paris at that time. But white art historians, in their myopic centering of whiteness, dismissed even his intention, even Manet's intention. So that
Yeah, I've read it. I watched a lecture.
you
Yeah, that book.
saw that lecture? Yeah,
Yeah,
modernity. Yeah.
yeah. Her book is I didn't read the book yet, but it looks fascinating, and I caught the lecture that she gave about it.
Yeah, no, so that's, I think, but I'm going to end with the last question. Sarah Smith, I would love to know more about what Titus mentioned was the difference between how audiences approach works of art. Could they both say more about the expectations that audiences bring to visual art versus the written word? Separate question, how do audiences take into account the breadth and length of the artistic process while also accounting for the ways that the artist writer changes over time? So questions about audience and also the breadth of the oeuvre of the artist.
I think the first question we've been talking about the whole time, really.
I think there's a different expectation though for painters and poets. I think.
I mean, don't neither one of us have an audience. I mean, this is like the reality of it, right? We having this conversation.
No, I think we win. I think the poets have no audience.
No, painters ain't got no audience. I mean, this is real. Like one of the things is like to figure out how to have people have art in their homes and think about art. And that's why me and Titus doing a book for the redaction, because we want the book in people's houses so that it's a part. Remember what Crowns came out about 2005, 2006, and it had a companion book that was about Black women hats. And I was working at a bookstore during that time, and it was flying off the shelf. We didn't have any art books in the bookstore, right? But that book was flying off the shelves because people in the community was really interested in this book about hats. I think Oprah might have featured it or something. But I think the reality is that like we both struggle with having a real audience. It's just that we got to do the Wu-Tang thing where we just produce one copy of our book and sell it for 15 grand. You know, we doing like we satisfied with this 1,000 print run, 2,000 print run. I think we got to do bigger. But the last thing I'll say about audience though, which is I think is part of what me and Titus have been doing with this project and thinking about, you know, as we produce this book and thinking about making it accessible to a larger audience and having Pleading Freedoms in a neighborhood in New Haven where art usually doesn't exist is bringing it more to the people. And for poetry, I think for me, my challenge is how do I make sure I give a good show? And then how do I make that show exist in spaces that could like have more people come to see it? And that is like a real challenge for me is to do something that's enjoyable. And so I turned Felon into a solo show with the intention of saying, I'm going to be on Broadway, you know, with the intention of saying, how do you produce a piece that like demands an audience? Somebody that sees, like somebody's flexing in the chat room, like I have a copy of Crowns, and that's what I'm talking about. Where you know, where like that book existed, where it was on the bookshelves, like it was a bestseller, and so anyway, I want my poetry to live and communicate to the audience in that way. And I know I didn't exactly answer the question, but I think I want to cut through this discussion of audience and say, what is the product that I produce, the art that I produce, what kind of audience does it demand? And my continued challenge as an artist is to make it demand a bigger and a broader audience so that they actually can be a part of the political landscape and the political conversation in a way that it might just be nipping at the outskirts right now.
Well, Genia and Sandra both have a copy of Crowns, so you're speaking.
audience is it's a weird thing, right? So, we're talking about the schools of thought that review our work, right? So let's be honest. I'm trained in a very European tradition of making paintings. And even though I push against it in some ways, and people understand it or don't understand it, faculty understand it or don't understand it back then, that is that language. And so I'm like trying to take that and make it my own and do what I want to do with it. But the audience question is complicated for me now, because there's one way where I could say the audience of my paintings are the people who buy my paintings. No, not anymore. That can't be it. And so because I come from that tradition where as painters, we're literally taught, it's weird because this is contradiction. We're taught that you're not supposed to be thinking about the audience. You're not supposed to be thinking about that. You're supposed to be thinking about you and like how you think about the piece and how you come to the piece. It's different from like theater, where you're always thinking about the audience and how like the audience is going to receive and think about a piece. Where are you going to be on the stage in relationship to where the audience is going to be? Like that's a part of the art form itself. I now have to find different ways to get to my audience. First audience is me, always. I'm always my first audience. Like, I'm never gonna make a thing that the rest of the world thinks is amazing, but I hate it. I'm just not willing to put stuff out in the world like that. It doesn't matter to me what everybody else thinks in that way. I'm working on finding ways to get after myself as a first audience, get to my folks to see it, because the work is now at a place where I'm happy to have the success that I'm having, but it means there's a limited number of people who are living with my work now, and those limited.
I will accept the piece though. I mean, if you want to expand that limited number,
work on the wall. Stop playing.
Oh, I do.
We'll all put it in all our homes. How's that?
We have to find ways. I have to find ways to reconnect. And so what do? Like, we do these prints, we do these books. Like, I'm constantly asked to do these talks and lectures. And honestly, I evaluate whether I do a talk and lecture based on the access of the people who ask me to do it. If you have a lot of access, I'm likely to say no. If you don't have access, I'm likely to say yes. Because like those often are the communities that at very least reflect my experience, which is where my quote audience comes from, even when thinking about myself, right? What would I have thought about this growing up where I grew up, 30, 40 years ago? Like what would my experience have? Or like we said before, what does mom think about this? My mother's reaction to Dwayne's piece, that was powerful. Way, way more impacting than reading Roberta Smith's review of my work. Way, way, way more impactful.
I think that's a powerful note to end on. And I think,
Wait,
Claudia.
Crystal, I just
Yeah.
because
Go ahead.
I have all these questions that he didn't ask, and because you brought up Roberta Smith, she called you.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
You called your work conceptual objects. How did you feel about that?
Who did? Me? I did?
No, Roberta Smith.
Oh, she called them conceptual objects.
Yeah, I think because they have cutouts. But as I was thinking about that phrase, I thought, I wonder what Titus think about that.
Well, because I know the language of art review, I'm gonna accept the compliment she was trying to give me.
Okay.
How's that? Like
Perfect.
I know what her intention was, and we don't have to rehash this, but what I will say is that it does go back to this idea of formal versus political. It goes back to that. She's elevating it in her mind. In her mind, that's what's happening. So I'll accept that compliment.
Because
there's a lot more to it.
Because the phrase brought to me like a David Hammond's, and your work in David Hammond seems so different to me. So that's why I was curious what you thought.
Yeah,
but thank you both. Thank you both.
Thank you. This was cool. And, you know, it's actually important. Though. I do think one of the reasons why I was excited about doing this is because it was the three of us. And you know, and I think about how we create historical records and how the historical records from the past, you know, you read a letter from Richard Wright to Gwendolyn Brooks, and it's like, man, I mean, Richard Wright is like talking about the Guggenheim, and you think it just means something to be a part of a conversation between the two of them, and it means a lot to be a part of a conversation with the two of you.
Thank you, Dwayne.
And it's amazing to be able to witness that conversation. So I want to thank you all three for agreeing to do it and doing it so beautifully. And I know we're in this Zoom world, but I do like to take a moment to ask people to unmute and to actually clap, because I think we need to applaud you, your work, and this conversation. So